Good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited to have so many of you joining us for our very first Partnering for Success webinar of 2023. I'm Asa Batiste, Assistant Director of Communications here at Education Commission of the States. And welcome to Partnering for Success. This webinar is designed to provide you, our commissioners, with opportunities for connection with peers, researchers, and innovators who are providing solutions to some of today's most pressing education policy issues. It is always our goal that you leave these webinars filled with insight, inspiration, and resources that help you more effectively address the challenges you face in your state. Today's webinar will focus on expanding computer science education and will provide you with insight into how some states are approaching this initiative. We have a dynamic lineup that includes the Honorable Asa Hutchinson, ECS Chair, along with Bill McBride, Executive Director of the National Governors Association, Kirsten Baesler, North Dakota's Superintendent, and Katie Jenner, Indiana's Secretary of Education. Each has seen the need for improvement and each has seen achievements in computer science education in their state. But before we get started, we'd like to thank our partners who help make events like this one possible. Thank you for your continued partnership and support. We look forward to hosting this webinar series with you and with state education leaders throughout this year. And to our audience, there are a couple of matters we'd like to make you aware of for today's session. One is that we are recording our session, so we ask that each of you remain muted, and if you prefer, with video off. Next, for optimal viewing, we suggest you take a moment to change your view settings to speaker view. And finally, we encourage you to place your questions in the chat for the Q&A portion of today's session. Well, let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce Jeremy Anderson, President of ECS, and the Honorable Asa Hutchinson, who will kick off today's discussion.
Thank you so much, Maisha, and it's great to be here today. And Governor, it's great to be here with you with an opportunity to talk a little bit about your initiative that you've worked so hard on over the years. And so let's just start off with a few questions for you. How did computer science really become a focus for you and your administration?
Well, thank you, Jeremy, and it's great to be with you today. And I'm excited about hearing from North Dakota and Indiana as well as to their success story, but I wanted to talk about this being one of the most meaningful and rewarding initiatives that I've had in 8 years as governor. And so the computer science initiative started off when I first ran for governor. It was a focal point of my campaign saying we're going to put computer science, computer coding in every high school in Arkansas. So we had a lot of momentum. When it finished the campaign, the legislature embraced it. They passed a requirement that computer science be offered in every high school. And of course, at that time, some of it had to be offered virtually to some of our, many of our rural schools, but we gradually started training teachers. In fact, we put money behind that effort. And the result is that we started out when I became governor with 1,100 students statewide taking computer science. That grew each year to where this last year it was 23,000 students taking computer science. So you can see the massive growth in that. In terms of the teachers, Jeremy, we started off with only 20 teachers that were certified to teach computer science. That now is over 650. And so that's how it started. And as it caught momentum, it got me even more excited and to see the results of it in the students' lives. The students embraced it, and it took a while because we had to sell it to them, but once it started, then they realized how much it was going to be changing their lives. And so it was an exciting time. And then whenever I saw that this benefited us as a state in bringing tech companies in, then I even got more energized. And so the result is that we went from just simply requiring it to be offered to this last year, we passed, I think we're one of 3 or 4 states now that actually require it as a graduation credit. And so that was a big step for us, but we laid the foundation by recruiting teachers, by encouraging the students and selling it to the public and parents as well. So that's how it started. And there's a little bit of the story behind it, Jeremy.
Well, that's great. So we've got a lot of governors who got reelected this year and some new governors. And as states are trying to consider, where they go, what would you really recommend that they think about when they're talking about expanding computer science education?
There's 2 ways you can go generally. One is through your commission or Department of Education, just change the credentials to move computer science into the forefront. That's one option, and it works in some states, but I found that actually having the legislature embrace it and passing a law gave the legislature buy-in for it. It gave it more momentum. It gave it more impetus with our superintendents. And so we started that way. And I would encourage governors, commissioners of education to look how you can get the legislature to embrace it. What kind of law do you need them to pass? Secondly, I hope they'll really important to invest dollars. And we put $5 million every 2 years. So it's $2.5 million a year. It's gone up a little bit, but that small amount of money gave us a incredible capability to have the Office of Computer Science within the Department of Education. It gave us money to pay for the teachers as they are being trained and certified, which is really important. Don't put the burden on them. You've got to be able to pay for it. That incentivizes them. And so the money is important. And we also had it so that we actually were able to encourage our students. If they got a 3, 4, or 5 on an advanced placement computer science course, we actually gave them cash reward for it. So all of that combined, we were able to do with that modest amount of $2.5 million a year. And that's an important part of it. And I would encourage that. Obviously, the recruiting of teachers is critical. The paying for their training is critical for that. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Jeremy, but those are some key ingredients.
Well, that's really helpful, Governor. So if you were going to start an initiative on computer science, because there's some states that have started into this, but it's not a wildfire yet across the country. I know you had a lot of work with the NGA on getting a letter signed by almost all of the governors that they wanted to move forward with some of these initiatives. What would you recommend as a first step education leaders should really look at to get started?
Well, you're right. We have a lot more work to do nationally for computer science in all of our states, and the governors are doing really advancing it. We had over 50 governors signed a compact. Actually, it's 55 governors of territories and states signed a compact saying they're going to advance computer science education. And so it's moving. Just to give you an illustration of the progress, when we started this, only 10% of high schools across America even offered computer science. Today, that is over 50%. So you can see the progress has been made over the course of about 8 years. But what I would encourage the leaders to do is to create a task force. If you need to set, you might not have a campaign like I did to set the stage for it. In fact, even with that, we created a task force, brought in our technology companies, brought in educators, and they made recommendations as to how we can advance computer science and what are the steps for that in the state. And then after about 4 years, I reconvened the task force and gave them a new charge and saying, review what we've done and make an additional set of recommendations, which was to broaden the curriculum. So I think that's a tool that was useful for us. I would encourage you to look at that because that way you have a broader set of ownership for it, momentum, and stakeholders that are invested in it.
Well, that is great. And thanks for sharing some of the insights from your concerted effort over the last 8 years, Governor Hutchinson. And right now, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is the Executive Director of the National Governors Association, Bill McBride. Bill is going to join us to help moderate today's continued discussion and panel. Bill has led the NGA since 2019 and is focused on just about everything, and I mean that sincerely. He has had significant focus on the pandemic response and recovery. He has worked a lot on economic growth, workforce development, infrastructure investments, cybersecurity threats and protections, and on some community renewal best practices. But Bill also guided the NGA through Governor Hutchinson's initiative as NGA chair, which focused on K-12 computer science education. So Bill, I'm going to go ahead and turn the virtual podium over to you now.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy, for inviting me and also Governor Hutchinson to participate today. And it's a pleasure to be with you. Just some background on the National Governors Association. Since 1908, NGA has served as the bipartisan voice of all the leaders of these states, commonwealths, and territories. And we bring together governors, partners, and policymakers to implement bipartisan solutions to pressing national problems. And each year, the NGA chair selects an initiative that can make a difference across all states and territories, showing the power of NGA to convene governors from both parties to identify and develop best practices that make a difference in the states and in the lives of their constituents out in their states. So as our NGA chair last year, Governor Hutchinson chose to focus his initiative on expanding K-12 computer science education. And so Governor Hutchinson and NGA engaged and convened governors and key stakeholders on the chair's initiative in multiple forums, including 3 state convenings, the first being in Denver, Colorado. The second one was in Bentonville, Arkansas, and the third was in Boston, Massachusetts, that engaged a bipartisan group of more than 20 governors convening. At the Boston meeting, the NGA also released a toolkit that governors and states can use to strengthen their computer science programs. And the initiative was also centrally featured at both NGA winter and summer meetings, including a dedicated plenary session at the NGA winter meeting in Washington, D.C. in January of 2022, attended by more than 40 governors and featuring a moderated conversation between the former governor of Rhode Island and the current Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, and 3 Fortune 500 CEOs, Beth Ford of Land O'Lakes, Julie Sweet of Accenture, and Corey Berry of Best Buy. And they spoke about using computer science education as a springboard for increasing students' overall digital literacy. Now, at the NGA winter meeting, as part of the chair's initiative, Governor Hutchinson introduced, as he mentioned, a compact for governors to sign, committing to expand K-12 computer education in their states. And the compact focuses on a broad commitment to expanding access to K-12 computer science education while providing multiple flexible pathways and strategies to reach goal-based, for how to reach that goal based on state context. The final compact was presented with 50 governor signatures at the NGA summer meeting in Portland, Maine in July of 2022, including Governor Burgum and Governor Holcomb, and we have both of their states represented today by their education leaders. The commitment by the 50 governors has provided a strong foundation for NGA's continuing work to support governors on broadband and digital access and literacy across K-12, post-secondary, and the workforce. Now, turning to our panelists to discuss their efforts to expand computer science education in their states. First off, we have Kirsten Baesler, who has been the North Dakota State Superintendent since 2012, and Dr. Katie Jenner, who is Indiana's first Secretary of Education and is formerly an education advisor to Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb. So thank you both for joining us today. It's great to have you with us. And so to get started, I'd like to have both of you address the following questions. First, what was the catalyst for adopting computer science education in North Dakota and Indiana? And second, what policies have your states adopted to expand access to computer science education? And how have you influenced those policies in your roles as chief? So let's start with Superintendent Baesler. Oh, she's on mute.
Kirsten, I think you're still muted. The joys we all have with these.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. McBride, for that great introduction. And thank you to ECS for having and hosting this. And particularly thank you to Governor Hutchinson for elevating this conversation to the national level, the level that it needs to be. As Mr. McBride mentioned, I've been in this role now for over 10 years. It's my 11th year in office. And so I feel like everything that Governor Hutchinson said about the playbook has been what we have lived. And it is so true and so accurate as he builds that, as he said, talks about building the coalition, supporting the teachers. So what was the catalyst for this work in North Dakota? The need, the absolute need. Prior to me being elected in 2012, I was a library media specialist and a technology integration specialist in our largest school district in the state of North Dakota. So I brought with me the understanding of the importance of our students not only being consumers of technology and education technology, but actually understanding how it works. You would think that it would have been a no-brainer, right? Like I thought this was going to be an easy thing to do. And in fact, it really wasn't. We started that effort my second legislative session, 2015. Didn't hurt that we have the Microsoft's second largest campus in North America is located in Fargo, North Dakota. So we had a large tech industry. I had a lot of supporters for that. That didn't hurt, but essentially we came up with a plan. The first policy that we were able to get across the legislative table was to give the Department of Public Instruction the authority to issue computer science credentials to add to our teaching licenses. And that occurred in the 2019 legislative session. Prior to that, in the 2015 session, we began working on a plan together, a computer science plan together. What we learned early was that in addition to computer science, cybersecurity was a very big issue for us. We have a couple of Air Force bases in the state of North Dakota. We have the drones, some significant drone development at our University of North Dakota. So cybersecurity really rose to the level. So in addition to being given the authority to establish and create teacher credentials to be added to teacher licenses, we were also given the go-ahead to create computer science standards, computer science and cybersecurity standards for every grade level. We became the first state in the nation to have computer science and cybersecurity standards. So that was a pretty significant piece of work. Again, bringing together stakeholders. And then it was really to increase the momentum. And when I talk about the need, I don't, at first it was very misunderstood that this was the education or the workforce sector trying to create a bunch of coders and a bunch of computer programmers, and then asking the question, how does that elevate above every other? So really the education of our constituencies of all groups saying that, no, this isn't about developing future computer programmers or future cybersecurity officers. It's about helping our students understand the fundamental foundational need on how computer science works and how cybersecurity works. I equate that to when kids enter in kindergarten, we teach them to put a seed in a pot of soil, and we get, with the right amount of water and sunlight, it grows to become our food. We teach our children about the electrical circuit and electricity in 5th grade, not because we want them to be electrical engineers or electricians, but it's part of their everyday life. And we need to teach them how to harness it for good and keep it from hurting them. It's the same thing with computer science and cybersecurity. Once we began sharing that message, then it was amazing how many people came out of the woodwork to support us. Parents, families, every industry, our North Dakota National Guard, our Homeland Security. And I say this because just 2 days ago, there was a committee hearing where those people all came from across the state of North Dakota to testify in support of the policy bill that we have put together. It provides $1 million for providing of teacher education, another $1 million in my budget for paying the teacher stipends. But what this policy does is it requires that in order for a school to operate in the state of North Dakota, elementary, middle, or high school, they must do 2 things: offer a computer science and cybersecurity course, and every school must create a computer science integration plan, meaning that there will be a plan to integrate those standards that have been adopted into all other content areas. And so in order to operate, as I said, to be approved, every school building. The second thing it does is make it a graduation requirement and provide funding. So that hearing got a do pass recommendation out of committee and will be heard on our House floor this afternoon. So There were over 25 individuals representing organizations testifying in support of this bill and 0 in opposition. So the momentum, the 8 years is paying off. It's been a journey, but I think probably the most compelling testimonies came from a teacher that had been integrating computer science into her elementary classrooms for the last 5 years and has talked about the decrease in behavioral issues in that. And then the second most compelling were from 2 students that talked about how those computer science classes are so necessary and helping us understand that even though 11% of our students in our state of North Dakota are Native American, only 133 of them are taking a computer science course. For our parents to understand that the location with the second most job openings in this field is remote. That was another big thing for a state like North Dakota, who wants to keep their young people in the state, knowing that they could earn a good wage and still volunteer for the local fire department in one of our small communities in North Dakota. So fingers crossed for North Dakota, we can carry it across the finish line this session.
And Bill, I can answer this question pretty quick. Our catalyst for change was Governor Eric Holcomb. It takes a leader. Governor Hutchinson said that, and it's spot on. Governor Holcomb listened to our industry and business leaders about what's coming ahead in tech. We're a global economy, our nation's security. He listened, he put it on his agenda, and we're off to the races in Indiana. That was in 2018. The impact of his leadership has done the following. 8 years ago in Indiana, we had no kindergarten through 8th grade computer science standards. Today, they're in place and we assess those. 8 years ago, we had very few high school course options. Today, we have over 14 high school course options, and we track that data closely. 8 years ago, we had limited licensing options for our teachers. Today, we have a specific computer science license and also increased flexibility. Again, 8 years ago, this is hopefully giving everyone hope who has nothing right now. 8 years ago, we had minimal professional development for our teachers. Today, we have 5 state-funded professional development programs. 8 years ago, we had less than 25% of our high schools even offering a computer science course. Today, all school types, we have 75% and 85% of traditional public schools offer computer science. There's continuous growth and progress. Our next steps are for the State Board of Ed to consider requiring the course to catch up with the leadership of Governor Hutchinson and others. I know our governor is very interested in this. He's emailed me directly, like, when are we doing this? When are we doing this? So we're ready in Indiana and have a lot of energy behind continuous improvement.
Great, thanks to both of you. Any barriers that you encountered in doing this, and if so, how did you overcome them?
Hey, do you want to go? So the barriers were the fear of lack of access of a qualified computer science teacher if we made it a requirement. The fear was adding more onto the plate of our already overburdened, sometimes overworked teachers. The fear of taking away other electives. The fear of local control being taken over and allowing school districts to do what met their local context. And so those were the barriers. In fact, the bill that is going to be heard today on the floor was introduced during our special session in November of 2021, and it simply said all schools will provide and offer. All schools will ensure that the computer science cybersecurity standards were being taught, and it would be a graduation requirement. There was tremendous pushback from our high school principals, from our local school superintendents, and even our school boards association members for removing that local control. The legislature during the special session added that to my superintendent duties. They didn't say study it. They didn't say see if this is a good idea. The directive to me under the superintendent's duties was to convene a group of workforce, development stakeholders, and educational stakeholders to find the best way to ensure that this is in our schools. It didn't ask us if we should do it. It said, find the best way. I took that directive very, very seriously, convened a task force, brought people together, educated people, and really there was still some resistance, but what it allowed us to do is help everybody understand that in our state constitution, at least, I'm not sure what other state constitutions say, but in our state constitution, it's a clear directive that the legislative assembly is in charge of establishing a uniform system of public education available to all. And that the constitutional officer, the superintendent of public instruction in our state, is directed to implement and execute those laws of expectations. Where we honor local control is that local control is the responsibility of how does a local school board and those leaders, school leaders, make the day-to-day operational decisions that is unique and specific to the context. So really understanding what those roles were. Our legislators beginning to understand that in some areas of our state, we had a lot of access. In other areas of the state, there was zero access. And so were they meeting their constitutional obligation of a uniform system of access to opportunity? And so really zeroing in on that. But what we overcame was really, it was compromise and collaboration and allowing those school boards to approve the integration plan rather than the state constitutional officer of the superintendent of public instruction. So allowing the state, and that's what this bill says, the state legislature will establish the expectation for all, and the local school boards will determine how that looks and how that is delivered in their local schools.
So our greatest challenge in Indiana was absolutely the staffing related challenges. But there's a threat that we don't talk about enough in our country and in Indiana, and that is that really in this topic, we're not moving fast enough. And we have to go. So we have to solve for that challenge, that staffing related challenge. So when Governor Holcomb put it on his agenda in 2018, we also had a lot of General Assembly partners who not only made policy and requirements, of which we're glad to share with you, but they also, as Governor Hutchinson mentioned, they budgeted money. In Indiana, we serve 1.12 million children. And so I'll just give you 3 budget lines that we have as a department. I have $5 million in STEM teacher recruitment that we work with our Commission for Higher Ed and specifically zero in on our areas of need like computer science. We have $4.5 million in STEM program alignment. And that includes also the after school programming that complement computer science, like robotics, and really connecting with the child and having them raise their hand and say, I want to be a part of computer science. And then third, we have $3 million annually in the next level computer science program. So we give grants to local schools. We're big believers that we support as the state, and locally is where the change happens. So we look for the best opportunities, the best communities that can move the needle. We invest there. We monitor return on investment and invest more if they show it. So to overcome those staffing related challenges, again, those investments are key, and glad to talk further about 6 or 7 key statewide professional development opportunities that we offer for teachers if time allows. Thank you.
That was actually something we heard in our meetings around the country, was the staffing issue and how to address that. And also heard we had some students on our panels too, which really told some incredible stories of what they were learning. And in fact, a couple of them said at one panel that they thought they moved more than the teachers did on the subject. So it was really fun to hear them as the users. So what do you think the future looks like in this in North Dakota and Indiana? What are your plans moving forward?
So first steps first, we're going to get the bill passed, which will require it for approval in the state. It will require it as a graduation requirement. We too have been working simultaneously while you're working on the policy side. You have to work on the practicality. Those staffing issues are a real thing. And so $1 million and we've used ESSER funds. I used a portion of my COVID state set aside funds to be doing the professional development. We set a goal of having at least one computer science credentialed teacher for every 200 students in each of our school buildings. That equates to 722 teachers in the state that are necessary. We're more than halfway there. We have over 400 teachers that have received that credential. We've been doing that work for the next 3 years, or the last 3 years. So for the next couple of years, we need to get to that place where there's at least one computer science credentialed teacher for every 200 students. So the next step for us is how do we embed this into our teacher preparation programs? So we don't have to continually bring people to professional development to get this credential after they have already been in the schools. We need to educate our workforce. So all teachers are prepared with at least the basic foundational, the computer science level 3 credential on how to integrate. And so working with our institutions of higher ed, interestingly enough, the chancellor of our university system also testified in support because our Board of Higher Education just passed a policy that is requiring digital literacy for a gen ed requirement for all of our US, our North Dakota university systems. That will begin next year. So I think we have great partners with our university system to talk about how do we embed that into our education preparation programs. So that's the next step for us.
So in Indiana, I'm going to zoom out and then I'm going to come back in straight to computer science. We're also in legislative session, and our Speaker of the House, Speaker Todd Houston, again, you have to have leaders to help drive this, has really, he has a bill 1002, if you want to look it up, weekend reading material. But he has a bill that really focuses on reinventing high school, because computer science is just a piece of this. So in Indiana, we're contemplating how might we make sure all children in 11th and 12th grade have access to quality work-based learning and have access to earn a quality credential of value based on market need and demand. We want all children to have access. We know in Indiana, like other states, information technology, computer science always rises in terms of need. And so that will absolutely be a part of the equation where we get students out into the workforce, get them into Salesforce, get them into Cummins, get them into local businesses so they can see that even rural communities, Kirsten mentioned this earlier, have cybersecurity challenges. We need our students ready and they need to see that. The credentials of value, how do we make sure they're prepared? And we don't wait until they're 19, 20, 21. Let's integrate that into our high school curriculum. Let's make sure we get those computer science and information technology certificates of value earned prior to high school graduation. They can continue to stack it later, or they could directly feed our workforce. So we're very excited about that bill moving through. And then the other thing on that is high school diploma flexibility. As a country, we've been doing the same darn thing for way too long. Years and years and decades. It's time we shake the tree on this and really think, what does the future look like in our world, in our country? And therefore, what does education need to look like? So we're starting at that high school level, as I mentioned, but when we open conversations on our high school diploma flexibility, again, I mentioned those two focuses, but one thing we'll pick up immediately as a state board of ed is looking to require computer science in addition to financial literacy, civics, and data science for our math pathways, which feeds computer science. So we are ready for momentum and movement here in Indiana, and just really excited to have so many business, industry, and educator partners in this, and I should say legislative and our governor partner in this journey.
That's great. Boy, both of you, I mean, the energy you're just putting forward on this is fantastic. I mean, it's like if we could replicate this, all over the country, 50 states and territories would be fantastic. Really exciting things you're doing. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Governor Hutchinson, because I think you've got a couple questions, but isn't this great, Governor, to be back together again talking about this?
Well, it is. I'm re-energized. So well done on the panel, and both Indiana and North Dakota is exciting to see what's happening. And the fact that, Bill, you're going to have to give me a report, by the way. I'm out of the loop a little bit, and I need to know what's happening in the states. I'd like to know, and you'll be able to measure it when the legislative sessions are over, the progress that's being made. So it's exciting to see governors and secretaries, commissioners out there doing such great work. I was going to have a couple questions here, actually one, but then I'm going to give you an alternative so you can slide around any way you want. But one question is, I gave advice as to what other states can do in starting this process. What advice might you give to your peers as they look at advancing computer science? That's one question.
Governor, I think you're frozen, at least on my end.
Me too.
So what if Kirsten and I take that question while he gets unfrozen?
Okay.
So how can other states lean in and advance computer science? The first thing that I think sometimes as states and leaders even, we let perfect get in the way of good. And I would say to any state listening, you just have to move because you're never going to hit perfect. You just have to get started, or even acknowledge where you are today, which I shared very honestly where Indiana was 8 years ago, where we are today, and where we're going. You have to continue that improvement, setting those goals, being publicly transparent, and working together to move the needle. The only other thing I would add to that is partners, partners, partners. Our industry leader partners, our university presidents, like past president, Purdue president, Mitch Daniels. We have a lot of champions in our state for computer science, and I'm sure you do too. I'm sure every state does. Leverage your champions all day long to drive the change you need to see.
I would say for those, Katie and I rarely disagree, and no one ever accuses us of being low energy. So I'm not surprised that there's a lot of, it's just who we are. But this is an exciting topic. And I would say just teachers get excited about this as well. So if you're just going to really start at the very beginning, get some teachers really excited about this, because those evidence, those proof of concepts are really, really important. You get those teachers out there advocating, that energy grows, and it really is self-propagating at that point. If you are a policymaker or an appropriator that is on this call, money does matter. In order to get those teachers excited, pay them for their time and pay them to have access to get trained so they can bring this exciting way of learning everything to their classrooms. Once you get those teachers excited and on board, those family members get on board because their kids are coming home excited about the way that they're learning, and attendance goes up, and absenteeism goes down, and lack of engagement, all of that just goes away. And that's the stories that you will need to get, to make progress on this. As Katie said, partners, 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 partners. And don't be afraid to look outside of your normal sphere of your regular partners. Yes, there's the tech industry. Yes, there's parents. Yes, there's higher ed. Yes, there's the computer science departments. But there are so many other people that are really seeing. So please just think about those non-traditional partners as well. And then finally, I would just say, don't give up. I mean, just keep coming at it. When we work in policy and we work in politics, there's the need to collaborate and compromise. And so just keep coming at it and say, okay, one bite of the apple at a time, right? Another round around the merry-go-round, grabbing that brass ring. And each year, I think that you'll get more partners beginning to understand and see, particularly in the case of policymakers, more people that are willing to push that green vote for an appropriation or a policy than the red vote.
Governor, I already answered your question. When you were frozen, Kirsten and I have no challenge with the words flowing. So we just took your first question and ran. So we didn't even hear your second question option. You're welcome to throw it our way.
Well, you didn't hear my question about the federal rules and whether there needs to be any adjustments. You didn't hear that?
No, let's hear it now. We probably on that too.
So this is uniquely a state initiative. and the states are leading in this, but sometimes we come across obstacles that the federal government throws into us. Like you might have a funnel of money that, hey, I wish we could tap into that, but they got strings on that, we can't use it. Or is there any other leadership role that the federal government can play to support the states more?
So I would say so funding always matters. I think there was a group of us that convened, Hadi Partovi convened a group of 10 state chiefs last, I believe it was October, during their annual code.org event. To have 10 chiefs on a panel specifically dedicated to computer science and coding was pretty phenomenal, but we all had a lot to say. But what was actually beautiful about that opportunity as well is that we were able to spend 2 hours with each other, just sharing ideas about what worked, what didn't work. And across the table, they said, pay those that are going to help you do this. And that is our teachers and our buildings. So funding always matters. But to the second portion of the question, what can the federal government do? It sometimes get out of the way. Just simply provide us the financial investments that are necessary. And when they ask for innovation, because the federal government or Department of Ed and other agencies at the federal level, everybody's asking for innovation, particularly in education. And we are too. But the larger your ship, the more challenging it is. And so allow us, encourage us, incentivize us to be innovative as states, but then really allow us the space to do that and the time to do that. And so what I've seen over the last decade is that there's an innovation grant or an innovation opportunity, but the window to prove success is so short. And so I would just say allowing the opportunity to provide a longer runway, if you will, to prove that that program has had an impact.
Good, excellent, thank you.
So echoing Kirsten, maximum flexibility, both monetarily and policy-wise. Some specific examples include, I think it's time that we consider how our nation's even accountability model needs to be updated. We as states are very focused on math and ELA. And if you step back and think about the future of what our country needs, what about computer science? What about some of these other really important missions we're trying to drive in the states? And why wouldn't we quantify that, number one? And number two, it would be really, really nice if we take time to celebrate in a nonpartisan way or a bipartisan way, both red states, blue states, purple states, and the successes that are happening. We have some states that are really moving the needle on this. Governor Hutchinson, you've led the way. We have some states that are really, really behind. And I think we have to be very honest about that, and also very honest about the future of our economy and our nation's security and why this topic matters.
I will add one more thing if I can. From the federal level, the U.S. Department of Education, funds both comprehensive centers, regional comprehensive centers for education, and regional education laboratories. So I mentioned that the opportunity for state chiefs to come together and share ideas was very powerful. The federal government, I think, could leverage their RELs and their comp centers to bring that same type of conversation, with a focus on what do we need to do in computer science specifically, or as Katie mentioned and just alluded to, on some of these other really big things that we know our nation's education system needs.
Love it. Thank you for sharing those ideas.
Well,
Great.
Thank you, Bill, for moderating the discussion with our two amazing chiefs. And thank you, Governor, for adding in your experience and what's happened with not only your work in Arkansas, but also with NGA. We've got a couple of questions that have already come through. And so I want to make sure to answer the best that we can and while we have our panelists here. The first was a question around what states require a computer science graduation requirement. And we know that Arkansas, Nebraska, Nevada, South Carolina, and Tennessee already do to some degree. And Megan McCann, who is one of our leaders here at ECS on this issue with the Chairs Initiative, will put a report from code.org in the chat so that you can see where that is. But another question that we received was really around is from Do you think cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and data science are of equal importance as computer science? And I think with some of the things that have come out recently in the news, that's an interesting question, and one that some states who are trying to move computer science may hit up against. So I don't know if Bill or Superintendent Baesler or Secretary Jenner or Governor Hutchinson, if you have any insights on that.
Well, I'll jump in there first that yes, I think that computer science and coding is sort of the foundational part of it, but then you've got to have capability of a cybersecurity pathway or emphasis. The data sciences is something, and you've got to figure out whether all of this is at the high school level or whether it's just preparatory for higher skilled learning. But the data analysis, data analytics, they have to be exposed to that so they can know whether that's a pathway that they want to pursue. But it's also now it's about blockchain could be something they need to be exposed to, so they just understand that concept as well. And then you have the ethical side of it. You know, whenever you're talking about data analytics and privacy, you've got to have that conversation at some level in maybe more of the advanced courses.
I would just echo and affirm what Governor Hutchinson has said. So I don't think that those other areas of cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and data science should impede the progress and the effort to increase computer science. Computer science needs to start in kindergarten at the very latest. There's so many unplugged ways through dance and movement that students can start to be looking at sequencing and loops, which is the foundation of computer science. But the artificial intelligence is actually another, the advanced chat GPT that we're all talking about. That is another affirming argument to say that is why it's so critical to begin with computer science fundamentals. You don't know why chat GPT is working until you understand the basic foundation and fundamentals of computer science. And so they aren't separate. It isn't an either or, but they are interlocking. Just like we don't wait to teach math until we're in high school, we teach math in kindergarten and preschool. And so we need to build, and they are not opponents of each other. They are not competitors against each other. They work together.
Well, hearing that question, my first thing is who asked that question? I want to have coffee with them later because they probably have an answer usually, right? And it's a really, really important question we have to consider. In Indiana, we're really thinking about data science more as a new math pathway. A new math pathway thinking about, and I heard a lot about this at the Excel and Ed conference, if any of you ever go to that, but they talked about how calculus was really designed as part of the journey to the space race so that we could overcome and be prepared and make sure kids are ready for that. There's a place for that. There's a place for that still. But we're contemplating, okay, how does data science look where we're building foundational and more advanced courses in that area that are beyond just statistics, but that get into more of that AI area. And that would be part of our math sequence. Computer science would be a complementary requirement. The other, I think, threat that we all have, and again, this is why we're so excited in Indiana to be rethinking high school, is we tend to, when we talk about coursework, we say, well, we're not going to get rid of anything. We're just going to add a few things, or you can take this course or this course in lieu of. I think we have to have the tough conversations as states and think about, like, again, clear the table. What should be mandatory for kids to be ready for the future? What is recommended? What is optional? We've got to get out of in lieu of, or let's just add another, and really think about what we need to do to prepare kids for what's ahead.
Those are great answers. And we've got a few more here. I think one who was from a representative from Minnesota about what does the state need to do to really get starting on foundational policy. I think we've answered a lot of that on the value of both partnerships, but also leadership and the importance of having someone who can be the leader to help shepherd this through. The last question I'd like to ask all of you before we close out is a question from John Underwood, and it's kind of lightning round because we're getting closer to the end of time. So what guidance would you suggest for states seeking partners to help fund some of this computer science work? Both business and industry is really probably where the focus is.
So start with your state chamber if you have one. Start with them because they're representing everybody. One of the most vocal and strongest supporters of our effort in North Dakota was the Restaurant Association. They know that nobody calls for a reservation anymore. It's all on open table, and so they were so that I would have never thought of that, but the chamber pointed me in that direction. And so I would say your chambers and your trade associations, just go to them at the state level and see where you might have some congruency and where your mission intersects.
So my mind goes straight to a recent scenario we had in Indiana, where in August we announced the largest ever literacy investment in our state's history, 111 million, partnered with Lilly Endowment, and success breeds success. So I immediately started getting calls from some STEM related industries some CEOs in our state and philanthropies who came around the table right here where I'm sitting and said, okay, now how can we invest in STEM, in computer science, and preparing for what's ahead? So in addition to what Kirsten said about the state chamber, local chambers, local community foundations, I think the industry leaders, and again, really blurring the lines between K-12 higher ed and workforce, we're leveraging that all day long.
Well, thank you to our national experts and our audience for all of those great questions. We really appreciate each of you joining us today, and a huge applause for our presenters. It was our great privilege to feature each of you today. Again, to our audience, please remember that Education Commission of the States is here to support you in your work. So we hope that you're taking away at least one idea from today's session that may support you in the great work you're doing in your state. And if you have any questions or requests related to today's session, please reach out to Megan McCann, Assistant Director of Policy here at ECS. Today's recorded session will be shared in your post-event email. And finally, our next Partnering for Success webinar will review education priorities in the State of the State addresses on March 15th. Registration for this popular discussion will open next week. We hope you can join us. Thanks again for your time today.